And good morning, everyone. It is a wonderful Saturday, and I hope that everyone's having or had a wonderful week in lockdown for most of us. Welcome back to the Bubble Talk, and today we're going to talk about communication skills. Okay, but before that, of course, this is Bubble Talk, and we're supposed to have bubble tea. But as you can see, I only have a coffee. Okay, now I love coffee. Coffee is my favorite thing, but it completely defeats the purpose of the Bubble Talk. And the reason is lockdown. There's two guarantees. I'm going to tell you right now, just by looking at this set right now, there are two guarantees during the lockdown. Number one is you cannot get bubble tea, and number two is you cannot get a haircut. I should have got a haircut before the lockdown. I know. Just wait another 3-4 weeks, and you'll see something crazy, crazy going on up here. But yes, today is not a bubble talk. Once again, it's turned to coffee talk, or we can even say it's latte talk time. So let's get into what is today's title? Today's title is about effective communication, right? How can I improve my communication skills? All right, so let's first talk about how important communication is. Like, how important is good communication? And honestly, almost every aspect of your life has to do with some type of communication, right? Even if you're not saying a single thing, you see communication out there with drivers too, right? You've seen road rage. They don't have to say anything. You just see the cars like swerving in and out. It shows that, they either have a disregard for human beings or human life, or they're in a rush, right? What the thing that we want to understand today is effective communication. How important is it? They say that people with effective and good communication, they're the ones that get all the promotions, like in a job. They're the ones that get the jobs from the job interviews. They're the ones that have meaningful relationships more than anything else. And you have to understand that this communication that happens all throughout our lives, it helps us actually to instill some type of trust in each other. And the thing I want to talk about a little bit more deeper before we go into the tips of good communication skills is we don't want to just get into communication of just relaying messages to people, right? It's more than relaying a message. It's about connecting with people, right? Communication is not just about giving information, but it's the connection. Because the moment there's a connection between two people, then not only is it understood, but there is trust, there's a willingness to follow or willingness to listen. And what we want to do today is we want to get into good communication skills that has to do with getting people to start connecting with each other. So once again, we're going to go through some Bible scriptures today. Of course, why? Because every week we're going to look through one of the most spiritual and most wisest books that has ever been made. Bestseller, there's almost every household has one. Number one selling, I think, 80 different languages. It's crazy. Okay, so let's get into the different types of skills that we need for good communication. So number one, now we all think about communication as just saying stuff, but actually for good communication skills, the very first thing is listening. Okay, listening is the number one thing, and I'm going to take a look at a Bible verse here, and it's very interesting because you might think it has nothing to do with listening, right? It's Joshua chapter 1, verse 7. And when you read this, it's interesting. It says, "Be strong and very courageous," has nothing to do with listening, right? "Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go." Okay? The clear message here is you have to listen well. Listen very intently and clearly so you don't veer from the right to the left. One of the things we find in conversations, and I know that we've actually done it before or we've experienced, where you say something and they completely get the wrong message, right? Like you're saying this, but they get this, and you're like, what is going on? If people are listening intently and carefully, what's going to happen? You'll be able to get the full message. And, excuse me, one of the reasons why we don't actually listen very carefully is because everyone's heard of the word lately, especially in America, there's a word called triggered. Right? I don't know about everywhere else in the world, but in America, it's like even more sensitive about this. It's like trigger. I just got triggered by this word. Oh, I got triggered by that person. And triggered, it's like a gun. The moment there's a trigger, what happens? The bullet fires. So what happens is people have conversations, and there's one thing that really bothers them the most, and they get really angry about it. And the moment someone says anything remotely close to it, it triggers them, and all of a sudden they're like angry or upset, or they stop listening to the conversation. The one thing about listening first is we have to get into a habit, and I'm not saying I'm nowhere near perfect at this, but it's something that we have to continually practice is listen till the end. Right? Listen till the very end. I know sometimes, like for me, I'm like high energy person. So I'm like, oh, yeah. And like, I want to jump in, right? But, we have to listen intently and carefully. Because what does it mean when we just read it, it says that don't turn to the right or the left. It means that don't go off of the actual message it's saying to us. And in the same way, too, in the scripture it says that God gives Moses these commands and you have to listen to them absolutely carefully. And then you will be successful. And the take I want to give you guys from this message is not going to the right or left so you can be successful doesn't mean that we're God, obviously, right? But it does mean that in order for communication to be effective, you have to be listening well. Why? Because there is a message that is trying to get, this person is trying to convey to you, but don't try to just get what you want to hear, and we have to listen until the very end, right? Don't jump in the middle. Don't interrupt. We have to listen until the end. And honestly, I think one good habit that you should have when you're listening to something, listen to something fully, and the good practice is after you've heard it, count to 10. Like count to 10 in your mind, right? Because you do need time to process it, or you do need time to ask questions like, oh, wait a second. Is this what they're trying to say? Instead of saying, I know what you're trying to say. You're trying to say this. It's actually more of, wait a second. So this is what I got from it. So let me ask a question. Or did I process this properly? And counting to 10 in your mind, you could just say, oh, oh, thank you. Let me process this. And just count to 10 in your mind, trying to figure out exactly what it is. And this will allow you to have a better understanding or to be able to grasp what the intent of the message is towards you. Number one is what? Do not veer to the right or the left. What does that mean? It means listen carefully and find the key message that this person is trying to give to you. That leads us to the second point. Now, the second point is response. Okay? Now, response is something that is very, very important when it comes to social behavior. Right? Response. Like, what does it mean, response? We're going to take a look at 1 Samuel chapter 3. And we're going to look at verse 8 and 9. Very interesting story because it's the calling of Samuel. Okay? And those of you who don't know Samuel, he's a prophet, and he was like given to given to God since he was born, like as a young child, he's given, right? And what happens is it's like God's calling of Samuel. And every time, God, one day while Samuel's sleeping, he's like, Samuel. And he's like, huh? And he gets up and he walks over to the high priest. I believe his name was Eli, I think. And then he says, hey, did you call me? He's like, nope. He goes back to sleep. Then 2 more times God calls him. And he keeps going back. But the third time, the priest says, hey, I think it's God. So what you need to do is you need to respond to God, right? You have to say, God, here I am. So the next time God spoke, what does it say here? A third time the Lord called Samuel. Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, here I am, you called me. Then Eli realized that the Lord was calling the boy. So Eli told Samuel, go and lie down. And if he calls you, say, speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. So Samuel went and lay down. And what happened? That last time when God called him and Samuel responded, what happened? God began to speak to him. Now, this is very interesting because a lot of people are like going, well, this is God. Well, can't God do anything he wants? No, actually, God is the creator of communication. So if he's the creator of communication, communication works in a certain way between 2 people, right? Or 2 or more people. And what it requires for there to be proper communication is response. Now, what does this mean? It means that when you are in the midst of communication and you are listening to someone, response is very vital for you to be present in the conversation. What does that mean? Just as God's not going to continue and say, hey, what's going on? And then just, wouldn't it be so weird if like someone calls you and then before you even respond or look at that person, they just start talking? Wouldn't that be so weird? Right? Someone's like, it's like, Sky, huh? And they're already talking like, are you talking to me? Is there another Sky? Right? What happens is we wait for response. And especially when it comes to communication, we have to realize that during the conversation, there needs to be a response from us, right? When we're being spoken to and some message is being delivered to us, we really need to respond. which means that don't be on your phone, right? Don't be like checking your social media, checking your likes and stuff like that. Like, honestly, wouldn't it be so weird if I'm giving a bubble talk? Like, so guys, wait a second. Oh gosh, I got another 15 likes. That's cool. Yeah, so what am I talking about? Oh yeah, communication. Work on your skills. Okay, and then, like, it's so weird, right? What has to happen is there has to be intentional focus on the person, but there also has to be response. Now, respond, it doesn't mean have fake response. It means that you're into the conversation, listening to that person, that when they say something like, oh, you're going to respond like, oh, okay. If it's serious, if you're really in the conversation and it's a serious conversation, you're not laughing. It means you're not part of the conversation if you're laughing in a serious conversation, right? And when you have a response, the response comes in many ways, but it also includes your facial expression, the focus of your eyes, your body language, and your voice. Okay. Oh, no. Like, if someone says something really sad, like my grandmother passed away, and you're just like, tell me that's weird. Right? That's so weird. It's like, oh yeah, and then my entire family has coronavirus. Hello? No, I'm listening. That is crazy. You have to have, if someone says that their family has coronavirus, you'd be like, oh really? Hey, is everything okay? Right? There's responses that have to come out showing that you are engaged and in the conversation. So, number one was about listening, but number two is about response. During this conversation, we need to respond, right? Oh, wow. Wow, seriously? Because what if something's amazing? Oh, yeah, and then I won the lottery. Congratulations. I'm happy for you. It almost looks like you're jealous or you're angry about it. No, you have to respond in many different ways, okay? Now, let's go to the third one. That kind of sounds like the second one. Because it's respond, right? But it's don't just react, you must respond, okay? Now, this is not talking about during listening. We're going into when you begin to communicate after someone communicates to you. One of the hard parts about us as being human beings is we're very emotional beings, okay? And now I'm going to show you what emotion does through this story. I'm sure everyone knows the story of Moses, right? And Moses and the Pharaoh, the 10 plagues. I think many people know about this, right? So in Exodus chapter 10, verse 11, it's crazy because this is the ninth time. This is the ninth time, okay? The ninth time that Moses put a plague on all of Egypt, so much suffering. So can you imagine if you saw 9 plagues? You should have already given up by the 3rd plague, right? But the 9th plague, he comes and he says, okay, plague of locusts. Are you happy? And the Pharaoh's like, all right, get out of here. I don't want to deal with you anymore. Go and worship your God, right? And then Moses is like, yeah, okay, so I'm going to take the woman and children and myself. We're going to go out for about 3 days, and then we're going to worship God out there. And he's like, oh, no. Read the verse. It says, no, have only the men go and worship the Lord, since that's what you've been asking for. And then they were driven away. Like, you guys got to think about this. And it's our situation. It is. Sometimes pride gets in the way, emotion gets in the way, right? There's so many things that are going in our hearts and our minds that we make these crazy decisions. Why? Because we get very emotional about it. When you become emotional about something, what happens is you begin to react. It's like, oh, no, I didn't say that. No, I totally didn't mean that. What? How dare you? Oh, did you? Oh my. And what happens is people begin to react in a very emotional way. But we have to respond, not react. React is you said something and I'm like, oh, and then that thing triggers me or that thing makes me very emotional. I get angry and I can't make the right decision. If you see what happens here, it's like, this is crazy if you think about it. 9 plagues in a row, massive suffering all over Egypt. And still he says, no, get out of my presence. Like, you guys are stupid. I don't like you guys. It's so weird. But when you think about it, it's happened in our lives so many times where you're speaking and someone blows up on you because they misunderstood or there's just one part of your message they didn't like. Or it's complete emotional reaction where they cut you off or they start getting angry or upset or sad when that's not the message. So let me tell you something about this. Why is it that we get into this emotional state, and why there's certain topics that are very close to us. For instance, let's just say in this coronavirus time, like your whole family's sick with coronavirus, and then someone pops a joke about coronavirus. So for you, it's very personal, right? For you, it is. Now, this person doesn't really know. So, you can't really blame them for it. Of course, it might be an insensitive joke, but they don't know that your whole family has coronavirus. How could you blame them for something that they have no idea? Yeah, it might be. You could just say, oh, that was a very insensitive joke. Just want to let you know that actually my whole family has it. Like, oh, man, I'm sorry. But what happens is when emotion comes in, we're talking about this very negative emotion that brings stress. Right? Because there's good emotion like joy and happiness. It doesn't bring stress, obviously, right? How many people are stressed when you're like laughing? No one's stressed, right? You're stressed when you're angry. You're stressed when you're sad. You're stressed when you're anxious. You're stressed when you're worried. And what happens, this is something that's very interesting, that what your body reacts to stress. And what happens is there's a chemical hormone in human beings and animals called cortisol. And what happens is when you get stressed in a certain situation, this cortisol just shoots in your brain. And what it does is it basically shuts off your prefrontal cortex. Like this is where like self-realization, actualization, self-soothing, like control of emotions is all in your prefrontal cortex, right? But the thing is, when you get into this stressful situation, cortisol, this hormone, shoots into your brain. What happens is you don't really start thinking properly. So your emotions take over, and you get into what you call this fight or flight mode, right? The moment this cortisol hits your brain, they say that your central nervous system begins to work in hyperdrive, right? So you're like, oh, and you become very sensitive to many different things. And what happens is you lose control of emotion, right? And you get into this crazy fight or flight mode. And actually, there's 3 different things that you can do. Number 1 is you can freeze because you're stressed. I don't know what to do. And you just get paralyzed. You're like, oh, no, what do I do? You can fight, and you go back at them, and you fight, or you run away. And this is kind of what your body has whenever we're in threat. Now, nowadays, we're not in threat like the past where there's like a saber-toothed tiger ready to kill you. Like, it's not happening, right? The only threat we have is, oh, someone says something mean to me. That's what's our threats these days. It's not really that big anymore. It's not like an actual physical threat. It's a very mental threat. So what happens with these mental threats is we take it as a threat. Our body goes into total stress. Central nervous system goes into hyperdrive, and then we go into fight or flight or freeze. And one of the interesting things is your executive function in your brain that gives you these intelligent decision-making that is not emotional. What happens is these reasonable, intelligent decisions, that function of your brain cuts off, and you got to either run away, get out of here because you're being chased, or you are going to fight back, or you might freeze. And what we have to realize is a lot of the things that the stress that we're putting ourselves through is mainly because of our thinking and our perception of the way that we feel about something, right? And because I'm very sensitive to this or sensitive to that, what happens is we get triggered into this mode to go into freeze, fight, or flight. And what we need to do is we need to start to understand each other a lot better. We have to get out of this mindset that people are actually trying to hurt me, or like everyone's trying to threaten me with their words. We have to start becoming these reasonable, rational, and intelligent human beings that are listening, that understanding that in 99% of the cases, the intent is not to harm you, and the intent is not to hurt you, but the intent is to convey a message, right? We have to be those that don't react, but, what are they saying? I'm listening to it. I listen to the very end. I give myself 10 seconds. Okay. Try to understand it. Ask the questions that I need to ask. Then I get into the mode of, like, even when I'm listening, I make sure that I'm responding so this person knows I'm engaged in the conversation. And at the very end, I want to respond, right? Responding is, hey, I agree with your overall point. I may not agree with these points here, but it's about having a good conversation and effective communication with each other. And these are things that we really need to work on. This last thing I want to talk about today is integrity. And this kind of thing that's kind of wraps everything up is there are some people who have great listening skills, listen to the very end. They're responsive when they're listening. They respond and they don't react, but people still don't like to talk to them. Do you know why? Integrity means that after the conversation, what happens next? It means that whatever it is I said or what I heard, I'm going to do it. Right? Let's look at James chapter 1, verse 22. This is a very important part that comes out through the scriptures too. It says, don't just listen. Don't just listen to the word and deceive yourself, but do what it says. And this is what happens is people get deceived if people are just good at listening, but whatever the request or whatever it is that's supposed to happen, nothing happens after, then even though you listen well, they'll still say, I don't feel like I'm heard. And we've heard it before, right? It's like, what? I listened to everything they said. But they still say, I don't feel like I'm heard. Why? It's because nothing happened after. Which means that regardless if it's successful or not, or you listen to what they say, or it doesn't happen the way that they want, there is still follow-up and say, hey, remember last week we talked about this? Very grateful for that chat. I did discuss with some of the people about making some of these changes, and I try my best to convey that communication. And they decide to take this measure instead of this one here, right? And when people hear that, they're very grateful and thankful because they were heard. And that message was conveyed, and people actually tried to do it. So I hope that you guys, too, is after the good communication skills, one thing that allows you to become someone that people feel safe around, you're someone that they'll listen to, is there the integrity that with the words that you say, like for me, among religious and people with faith, it's always, hey, I'll pray for you. But the question is, did you really pray for them, right? And that's why sometimes it's best when you say, I'm going to pray for you, it's better to say, I'm going to pray for you right now. I'm going to pray for you right now. Here, let's pray. Why? Because that is going by your word. Hey, I'll pray for you, man. Pray for you. All right. Sometimes we don't even know if they prayed. But if someone prays for us, or sometimes I'll even write a prayer and send the text to someone. I'll write the prayer down. Just to know that, hey, I'm thinking about this and I'm doing this, right? So these are the four different things that I wanted to bring up today about good communication skills. I hope that as you recap these things about listening, right, listening to the end, right, not, you want to have that, you want to get to the point where you're connecting with people. And there's just a couple things, just last thing I want to say about connecting is, when you're connecting to someone, there's no judgments about the person, there's no biases about the person, there's no negative or like any emotion that swings us towards what they're trying to say, but that connection allows us to have real and true effective communication. And I hope that everyone else too, you'll listen, you'll respond, right? You'll also don't react, but respond, and you'll keep your integrity during these when you're communication with other people. I'm very grateful and thankful once again that you joined us for this Bubble Talk.